Fellas and ladies, this is a new segment that we're calling Psych on Your Screen. So me and my pal, Dr. Cashana Betterly, we're rocking our white coats. We have our stethoscopes with us because we're real doctors, and we're going to take pop culture that you see on your screen, your phone, your computer, your TV, and we're going to help learn from them. What happened that you could have been learning if we were paying close attention and identifying mental health themes in our pop culture. This week is special because it is the week of Thanksgiving, and we are celebrating this at the Get In Fellas Pod with a Native American Mental Health Week. So our first Psych on Your Screen is going to be great. We're going to be able to use the show Reservation Dogs, a really funny show on Hulu that really exemplifies Native American life on a reservation for 4 teenagers. I'm lucky and will be for all the Psychs on your screen to be joined by my good pal, Dr. Cashana Betterly. Introduce yourself, Cashana. Great to have you. Thanks so much for taking on this project with me.
Well, thank you so much for asking me to tag along. So thank you for that introduction. I'm Dr. Betterly. A little bit about myself. I am a double board certified child and adult psychiatrist, just like Steve here. As far as my training, I trained at Florida State University College of Medicine for medical school, and then I did my adult psychiatry training at University of Colorado with Steve, and then I did my child psychiatry training at Georgetown in DC.
And where are you now, Cashana?
So currently I am working at Indian Health Services. Specifically, I work for TBHCE. So that's the Telebehavioral Health Center for Excellence. And I work virtually across multiple IHS sites. Right now, I am working at 5 different IHS sites virtually. And some of those sites are located in New Mexico, in Arizona, in Colorado. Some of them are located in the Dakotas. So I'm everywhere. It's really cool. I'm able to really reach out to multiple patients while working here in my home office in Tampa, Florida. So it's been a really neat experience. It's been really good.
Cashana and I have that in common where you get licensed in multiple states, and so you can see people all over the country. And it really does add diversity to your workflow. Cashana and I were planning on doing the Psych on Your Screen anyway, guys. So it just worked out so perfectly that the timing of this and her working with Indian Health Services, Indian meaning Native American. You could think of, some of the parts of the country she alluded to that we commonly think of as having Native American reservations. Cashana, why work at IHS? I mean, what a unique place to work in this country.
Well, as we all know, Native American communities, or American Indian, Alaskan Native, these are all communities that are vastly underserved in many ways when it comes to multiple aspects of health, not just physical health, but also mental health and emotional health. And with child psychiatry, there's a huge shortage across the country for every population of child, for every group of child. And so I saw this opportunity. I am also a big fan of telebehavioral health and telehealth in general, which has been rising since the pandemic, and really even a little bit before the pandemic. When I was doing my training at University of Colorado, I did do a telehealth rotation during 3rd year, and I really, really liked it. Yeah. So when I saw this position, when I saw that I'd be working with a vastly underserved population, and that I'd be able to, combine that interest with my interests of telepsychiatry, I thought, this is Kismet. This is something that is perfect.
Whoa, Kismet, Cashana, busting out a little Hebrew on us. That'll make the audience happy. So
great.
Shout out to good Dr. Jay Shore, who taught me and Cashana a lot about telehealth with Native populations during our training. So yeah, Cashana, I emphasized there that this is so important. This week of Thanksgiving, November is Native American Heritage Month. And that is where the idea came. I think anybody listening to the show understands the Thanksgiving as we celebrate it now with Christmas shopping, football, is not that Thanksgiving is not the celebration that we likely should be doing in this country, which is truly to honor the difficulties that Native populations have had since what would be our cultural, our meaning wider American cultural celebration of Thanksgiving. So some reasons why this jumped into my mind as being so important, that subjective psychological distress is 2.5 times higher for natives over the general population, and suicide rates are the highest amongst any minority group and have risen every single year since 2003. It's extremely isolating. If you've never been on a Native American reservation, you'll get a little idea of it today from Reservation Dogs. It can be jarringly different than if you live in the suburbs of a major city in this country. We're going to talk about addiction as one of the 3 themes we're going to learn today and Psych on your screen. But just a quick highlight, overdose deaths from 2019 to 2020 in Native populations rose 39% from one year to another. Things have not been good. Cashana talked about the health disparities in more remote locations and the lack of financial resources. So we really thought starting this Psych on your screen off with a show that does an amazing job of keeping humor and depth, sadness. There's a lot of sadness in this Psych on your screen. And each week when we do this, we're going to try and think on 3 topics. So the show is hilarious and at the same time extremely difficult. Kashana, how do you think it strikes that balance? How does it feel for you?
I think the show does an amazing job of really striking the balance of the seriousness of the issues within Native American populations, especially those living out on reservations, and combining that with many humorous moments. They have a great cast. They've done a really good job of doing research such that they are representing the ideas, they're representing the traditions, they're representing the actual cultures of Native American populations. So they really did their research. I think they did an excellent job. And yes, these episodes, I kind of think of it as emotional whiplash. There are going to be some episodes where you are going to be crying out of sadness, and then there are going to be some where you're crying out of joy. And at the end of the day, most episodes, it's probably some blend of both, where you're going to be sitting in sadness and also joy and optimism. So I think that the show does a great job of that.
It's just really good. It's like a slow pace. So for those of you who have not seen Reservation Dogs, it is a comedy on Hulu. There's been 3 seasons, and it's centered around 4 teenage friends who live on a Native American reservation in Oklahoma. The creator of the show, Taiki Waititi, is very popular these days. He made the movie Jojo Rabbit. He is a native New Zealander who has been very famous and well-loved since taking his traits, taking his talents, worldwide. The really funny vampire show, What We Do in the Shadows, is also his.
Yes,
he's just a really
What We Do in
good
the
guy.
Shadows. He also did the, I'm blanking on the name. It's a pirate show. Did you ever see it or hear of it?
No, but
Okay, I have to look it up.
Yeah.
It's really, really good. I don't think it was...
He's done some stuff on the Thor movies too, which I knew. But in general, this show is worth noting because, Kashana, I looked this up when I was doing our research, that this is the first show in American history to have a full native production crew, writing staff, cast, and crew. So to really retain that authenticity and really just know how much it means to the community. This isn't something that's just gentrified for us. This isn't something that's whitewashed. The critics feel pretty good about how it portrays life on a reservation. Hence, Reservation Dogs. Yes, that's a Quentin Tarantino joke. 98% on Rotten Tomatoes, Kashana, as this show takes place 1 year after the suicide of one of the main four crew. One of their best friends and a cousin of one of the 4 complete suicide 1 year before the show starts and takes place. So that gives you just a little set of the background. Kashana, before we dive into the 3 themes, I wanted to share just generally why when it became why did I want to do Native American mental health this week? This clip from Reservation Dogs does a great example of showing why.
What do you suppose that means?
What, honey?
What does that mean?
I'm Korean, not Chinese. What the?
What do you suppose that means?
What, honey?
You see the graffiti on that sign back there?
Oh, yeah. I think it said land back, didn't it?
They mean the whole damn thing? They want the whole damn thing back? That's just not possible. I could see some of it back. You reckon that's what they mean, some of it back? Well, they got the casinos.
Will you quit being a shit ass?
Well, that's romantic.
So the reason I wanted to show that is because if you're just listening to this clip, it's 2 white people in the car. They're driving away from a Native American reservation, and on the back of a billboard it says "Land back, fuckers." And just kind of the Caucasian or American point of view on, well, we can't give it all back. I mean, they've got the casinos, right? And so I just think that's a really funny scene of honestly how I would imagine most people aren't thinking about native populations from day to day. It's not something that most Americans are interacting with because of the isolation of the communities. And I can say that for myself. When I moved from Ohio out to Colorado and have traveled more of the West, it's totally different. It was never in your face like that in the Midwest. You know, that whole Trail of Tears thing that maybe you've all heard about if you've done your history lesson, which was southeastern United States when they wanted to be building plantations in the South, essentially said, all y'all get out of here. And it really wasn't that funny. A lot of deaths along the way too. So moving those populations from east to west. So Cashana, what are the three things that when we thought about this show that you thought it was worth us diving into more?
Yeah, so I want to talk about historical trauma, which is the cumulative emotional and psychological wounding from massive group trauma across generations. I also think it's important that we talk about addictions. You did allude to this earlier, but the addiction rates in American Indian and Alaskan Native communities are much higher compared to other groups here in the United States. And then I also want to talk about Native medicine practices. So many things, there are many traditional and cultural practices that they apply when they are undergoing any kind of hardship in their lives. And so I want to talk about the different types of ceremonies that they engage in, the different types of Native treatments, and even even where I work at Indian Health Services, we have Native medicine practitioners and healers that we do refer patients to, which is awesome. And I can talk a little bit that in more detail as far as what we offer at Indian Health Services.
Yeah, I'd imagine we'll get more depth just because of what you do for work on some of these topics than we might get on other Psych on Your Screens, you know, really being able to layer some good education this week. And definitely, again, stuff that I don't think most Americans are thinking about when they're celebrating Thanksgiving. It's worth all our times to learn a little bit here and reflect. So it sounded like you want to talk on historical trauma first. It's a great way to set the stage.
Absolutely. So historical trauma. And that includes genocidal and cultural trauma. And again, I'll just repeat the definition that it is cumulative emotional and psychological wounding from massive group trauma across multiple generations, across the lifespan. And so when we think about how Europeans stole land and they stole government acquired land, they broke treaties, we think about the violence that Native Americans experienced as a whole, the massacre of multiple Native American tribes. And then we also think about boarding schools where kids were basically stripped of their heritage and their culture, where they would go to these boarding schools, they would cut their hair, they would change their names, they would change their religion and force them to speak English such that they would drop their native language. And through time, they would slowly forget their native language. Yeah. In addition to that, they were abused, they were neglected, and oftentimes they died young from various infections, which were secondary to the neglect that they were suffering from.
Shauna, in the States, this was, the late 1800s and early 1900s. But if this sounds familiar to anybody, this was going on in Canada up until the 90s, right? Yeah. And so you could be hearing this in the news. They've been finding kids' bodies in certain parts of Canada, but we were doing that exact same thing, Right. So just kind of pointing that out that, this was, remote for us, but not the flavors of that are still it's still within Native American culture. The fact that this happened and it really does explain a big gap in history and a big gap in spoken history within those groups. And just noting that we're diving right in, Cashana, I know, diving right in to the Native American portion, but historical trauma, intergenerational trauma, a lot of groups have stories with historical trauma and intergenerational trauma. So that's what I at least wanted to think about before we kind of dove specifically into the historical stuff. I mean, we have a couple right here, right? Cashana, the story of Black people in America obviously cannot be told without trauma and without violence. You think of slavery, and then as a Jewish person, right? You can't tell the story of Jews in America without the Holocaust and without other episodes of trauma over time. So a lot of groups suffer from this term historical trauma or intergenerational trauma. And Sean, I think we could have 17 50-minute episodes on intergenerational trauma. But for that reason, I was holding up The Body Keeps the Score back here and just knowing that we're well aware now of how intergenerational trauma impacts us both physically and mentally.
Yep, I've got my copy of Body Keeps the Score right here to my right here. That's an excellent book. And, it really wasn't until the 1960s that JFK actually recognized Indian tribes as sovereign nations with their own rights. And even to this day, even though there are multiple, there are over 350 federally recognized Indian tribes here in the United States, there are still many, many tribes that are not getting the rights, even though they should be getting those rights and they are deserved to have those rights. So it's very unfortunate. It's very it's unacceptable that the boarding school practices were happening up until the 90s in Canada. And when we think about this historical trauma, we also think about historical loss. And it turns out 20 to 33% of Indigenous adults report thoughts of historical loss on a daily basis, whether that is thoughts about their specific family members or whether that's thoughts about, maybe people who are close to them. And, it could even be thoughts about people in their families going back multiple generations who they never really had any, maybe they never met, they never had any specific relationship to, but they know that those are their roots and that's where they come from. And so this is something that is on the mind of Indigenous people very, very often.
Yeah.
And so then we have to think about what are the trauma responses. So what are the results of this historical trauma, this intergenerational trauma that has been going on for decades? So we do see a lot of survivor's guilt. We do see a lot of individuals feeling guilt or feeling shame that while they get to live and while they get to live a better life, their ancestors did not get that privilege. Even though, and this applies to individuals who, even though they are undergoing their own hardship, they're able to recognize that they do have maybe, I won't say an easier life, but they are living in a situation such that it's more safe compared to what their ancestors went through. So that's where the survivor's guilt comes in. And they also show a lot of loyalty to the ancestral suffering and the deceased. And that's where, which we'll talk about later as far as Native medicine practices and traditional ceremonies, where they do give thanks to their ancestors and to spirits that guide them on a daily basis.
Yeah, Kashana, absolutely. I wanted to just in a quick way how Reservation Dogs kind of points at that intergenerational trauma. You'll see two of the characters here, Bear and Willie Jack. Willie Jack is a low-key comedic assassin in the show, and they go to visit their uncle Maximus, who basically tells the story of having been mentally hospitalized. We learn that Willie Jack goes through some pretty serious and sketchy inpatient psychiatric hospitalizations due to seeing spirits. So it's like this confusing, he's treated like he has psychosis and schizophrenia, even though, right, what's the cultural difference between these things? But even just noting how this younger generation talks to this older generation in this clip.
All you elders, you got robbed of your feelings. Now you can't even admit or express them anymore. So you just sit here in your room and stare out the window. Like, I'm sorry, whatever you went through, boarding school, abuse, whatever happened to you, like, I get it. But us young people, we know things too. I'd give anything to see my cousin Daniel again. If Mexico wants to see you and you're just in here, fucking acting all stubborn, fucking go, bro. Fuck.
So I think this isn't, Kashana, this kind of a scene isn't really, specific to the Native community, as Willie Jack speaks to her Uncle Maximus about, like, we know you guys got, these things taken away from you. We know your history is difficult to talk about. And yet, like, we still need you. We still need you to be talking about these things and helping us. I think, this show, a lot of the time, our lens is through looking at, grandparent-parent interactions with kids and how the difficulty with mental health in the generations above us obviously continue to impact the generations below.
Absolutely. And there are so many examples of that in the show, but then I also see that so often in my practice. The respect towards elders is amazing. And it's something that is it's really, really nice to see, especially when you compare that to, I guess, the mainstream when you compare that to, American culture outside of Native American culture. I think a lot of times for the elder population, they feel like they're being left behind. They feel like they're being cast aside or that they don't really have a place in society anymore. And in the Native American culture, that's not the situation at all. In Native American culture, the elder community is greatly respected. Their wisdom is sought after. And it's really, really nice to see.
Yeah. And, Kashana, you were talking about those ways that this shows up for people. And I think it's pretty logical to see how this kind of trauma has bled into our second topic of addiction, addiction problems, substance abuse problems within Native communities. And we can, of course, flex back and forth between these topics. But we're going to start next week an addiction block of episodes here on the podcast. And so, just setting the stage here, right? Like, these people have gone through so much trauma. They've had loss. They weren't given resources by the government. They had all their resources taken away. It's fucked. So what are they going to do? They're going to, feel shitty, and nobody wants to feel shitty. That's the core of addiction. You feel sad, you feel anger. There's nothing you can do about it. You drink that away. Drink it or use other substances or other behaviors, as we'll learn. But really, really a lot of alcohol, which gained a term firewater, for all the problems it's causing the community. And then a lot of methamphetamine and heroin use have been plaguing the community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, overall, the American Indian population has an overall lower life expectancy. And you were talking about this earlier, even outside of the area of mental health, they also have increased rates of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and tuberculosis, on top
Whoa.
of increased rates of alcoholism and suicide.
Yeah.
So, when we look at the data, it actually shows that 10% of all Native Americans have any kind of substance use disorder, and about 7.1% of Native Americans specifically have an alcohol use disorder.
Yeah.
And they've done studies that have shown that nearly 25% of Native Americans reported in the past month any kind of binge drinking, and that Native Americans are much more likely to report drug abuse in the past month or year than any other ethnic group. So a little over 17% of Native Americans are more likely to report drug abuse in the past month. 28.5% are more likely to report drug abuse in the past year than any other ethnic group. It's a very pervasive issue in the community.
Kashana, it had me thinking about another, November mental health type topic, which is Veterans Day. And I remember when I worked at the VA, I was shocked at the amount of Native American vets, or mostly from like a Vietnam era, that were Native and had served in the military. My thoughts on that are like, why in the fuck would you serve in the military for this country, given how it's gone? Are you seeing younger generations? Do you still see a connection between military service and natives? Was that more just draft lottery stuff from Vietnam that I was seeing?
Not many. There are two patients I can think of right now that they're in their mid to late teens who have considered joining the military. I know that there is one patient I'm seeing who is thinking about joining the Air Force, and I believe the other patient is thinking about joining the Navy. And ultimately, I think it comes down to not really having a lot of resources, or the perception of, I've worked with a lot of patients who feel that they just don't have the bandwidth or the resources to go to college. They feel that this is their best shot. They feel that this is their best shot at having a stable future, of being able to, live the kind of life that they want to live. And so,
to quote, get out. Is that like a lot of the feeling? Get in, because you see that in Reservation Dogs a lot. I mean, the characters legit talk about getting out, and I think we see that transcend different types of cultures when you're in low SES, poor backgrounds. The military is a way to get out and make money. If not, then crime and violence, which we also see a lot of on Reservation Dogs. The characters steal cars, steal copper wires, all that stuff right at the beginning of the show, as we set the stage for the kind of desperation that these people can go through when they don't have any resources.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, that is something that we do see, that I do see clinically quite often in terms of, patients or their family members turning to crime. I work with a lot of kids who are living with their grandparents or their great-grandparents because their parents are maybe incarcerated due to things like theft or drug abuse, addiction. I even have a couple of kids I see who maybe they have a family member who is incarcerated secondary to murder. So there is a lot of that that's happening out on the reservations because, one, it's for many people, it's something that they see, it's a repetitive pattern, and that may be all that they know. And then two, like what we were saying earlier, they feel like that's the only way that they can get the resources that they need as far as doing things like stealing or selling drugs. And so that is something that I still see, especially out on the Pine Ridge Reservation. that is very, very prevalent for those types of crimes, unfortunately.
Yeah. So the show, again, is very light. I don't want anybody listening to this thinking this isn't worth their time. I mean, I'm rewatching it because we decided to do this. It's just a really, really great, funny, deep, well done, fucked up, strange show. So to touch on addiction, it does that in a few different ways. But Cashana chose a lighter clip where these guys, tell them about Uncle Brownie, who we're going to see here in a little bit. Kashana, describe the character.
Yeah, so Uncle Brownie, he's got to be in his mid to late 60s. He is a self-described pothead. He uses, and he's going to talk, and you'll see when you pull up the clip that he basically lives an isolated life. He never married, he never had kids. He actually speaks about his distaste for children and not really wanting to be around children overall.
Yeah.
But you'll see that he has this distrust for the government, which is something that we do see in a lot of elder Native American populations for obvious reasons. And then we also see how he talks about his legacy. He talks a lot about times in the past where he felt more powerful, and he basically doesn't quite understand at first why the kids are asking him for help and guidance or how he's going to be able to help these kids. But as time goes on, he does grow more and more attached to the kids and the kids to him. And yeah, he's a very funny character. He is more wise than I think maybe people would give him credit for, but he does have an addiction. He does have an addiction to marijuana. He's going to talk about that a little bit in this clip, and we will see how despite his own hardships, despite his own addiction, he does find a way to be there for the kids in the way that they need him to be there.
Look at that. Finally found it. And I buried that 15 years ago.
Why don't you just get your weed card? It's legal now.
Because I ain't no fool. I ain't smoking no government-sanctioned weed. GMO nightmare. Plus, I don't like the new weed. I like this old shit.
Same age as me.
Yeah.
Burns right. You can smoke 15 joints in one sitting.
Oh, fuck, 15-year-old bug, never mind. Yuck, how do you not see that?
Look out! Mosquito.
Oh. Wow.
She. What is it you want, anyway?
We need your help, Uncle. We need to learn to fight. This one just got his ass beat.
You know, I don't mess with kids. You know, kids just slow you down.
Told you he can't fight, man. Let's just go.
I can't fight? What? Sweet. I could have stabbed Andrew Jackson in his ugly old face if I wanted to.
I was just telling them that you hold the record for most knockouts in one night at Old Muggy's bar. 10 people.
10 people? Pff, I knocked out 20 people one night. Plus a cop.
Yeah, wow. I don't think I know of anybody who has consumed 15 joints in one sitting. That's, although again, this isn't the current, this isn't the current marijuana that's being used. This is, 1970s, which is a much different strength, much different potency. So,
and again, we've touched on these themes and we want to try and make this stuff fun. So obviously the substance use problems, it's nationwide, right? But in the Native communities, any impoverished, traumatized community, you're going to see those numbers bump, which is really a big focus of why we wanted to do this.
Yeah. Absolutely. So yeah, I just thought that Uncle Brownie was a good example of how he is going through, and it sounds like he has had, cannabis use disorder for most of his life. And you can see ways in which his life, he's functioning, right? He's kind of doing the bare minimum, but it's really not until these kids enter his life that he's able to recognize, okay, well, maybe there are different ways that I could be living my life, and maybe I can, contribute in a positive. And then there are other parts of the show where there's one episode where the main cop, he accidentally consumes a psychedelic, and so he spends majority of that episode running around in the woods and just having a tough time. He was basically drugged by by individuals that we currently see these characters doing things like you mentioned, trying to make meth, selling other illicit drugs. It's something that's very prevalent in the community.
I'm
So,
interested,
yeah,
Kashana, having you here is so specific because of that mistrust of the government. I think understanding mental health from a native point of view kind of it spins well into your final chosen topic of this tribal medicine. I'm interested in, I don't know if you know the history of or kind of a transition into native acceptance of more traditional mental health practices. Was that I wouldn't even be able to tell you if that was 50 years, 10 years ago, that kind of stuff, like, and kind of what's that balance struck these days of more traditional practices and practices we'd be using as
sure. Well, we like to combine both. So at IHS, we do give patients the option of working with a native medicine practitioner, which is really cool. And I work with a lot of patients who, they are working with a LCSW, so they are working within more modern, I guess what we would consider to be more contemporary mental health practices. And so they have that, but then they also are working with native medicine practitioners. And I think it's really nice to be able to balance both. I always like to ask new patients, what is their connection to their native history, their native culture? Do they engage in any kind of practices? It's a part of my intake for every new patient I meet with. And I will say the majority of the patients that I speak with, they do try to either incorporate native practices into their daily lives, or they have close family members who do. So, luckily is still prevalent, but I also do meet with patients who they don't really have any connection at all to their native heritage or their culture. So I just try to meet patients where they're at. If it is something that is important to them and it is something that they try to incorporate into their lives, I will discuss the option of native medicine practitioners. And honestly, even for patients who say that they don't incorporate native or traditional practices, I do still offer that as an option, because we do know that when it comes to cultural practices, religious practices, that those can be protective from a mental health standpoint. And they also increase sense of community.
Yeah, absolutely. What does that look like? What do you want to teach people?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. So I wanted to start by talking about grief. I know that we were, talking about historical trauma and historical loss. And so many Native American tribes, when they are grieving the loss of a loved one, they will engage in different practices. For example, sometimes they will cut their hair. Sometimes they will not engage in any kind of sun dance ceremonies. So no dancing, no singing. They will wear black. And oftentimes, for some tribes, this will last a year. For other tribes, it may last other periods of time. There are also ceremonies specifically for things like healing and clearing the air, clearing any kind, and trying to purify so that any kind of negative energies are cleared. And so I also wanted to talk a little bit more about specific ceremonies that do take place within the Native American community. One ceremony is, and maybe people have heard of this, sweat lodge ceremony, where you basically sit and you sweat. And the idea behind this is you're trying to cleanse, you're trying to get a fresh start to life. It's the purification of, for those that are undergoing any sort of transformation in life, or they're trying to undergo a kind of healing. And this includes sobriety. Many people who are suffering from addiction, they may participate in sweat lodge ceremonies to try to purify themselves of whatever negative forces may be contributing to the substance addiction. And so that's one ceremony that we do
also
see.
cross-cultural. I mean, in my people, we call that a schwitz, Kashana. You go and you hang out, you're sweating all day, and you come out a new person. So, hey, that's cross-cultures, but we probably took that from them, I'm guessing. But it's been popular, at least since Eastern European days. I know that, the concept of a schwitz.
Very cool, very cool.
Yeah.
And I've never engaged in any kind of sweat lodge ceremony, but it sounds really interesting. Have you? And it sounds like you have engaged in a spitz
No,
before?
well, I've engaged in the Jewish version of a sweat lodge ceremony, which is everybody goes to
Right,
the
a spitz.
baths, and more social, I would think, than any sort of healing. One of our good friends, Kylie House, a good friend from residency, her uncle So her aunt married a native who runs Lakota sweat lodge ceremonies up here in Colorado. So I know it's a big part. She's a huge part of the community, and that it's really meaningful for people in a tradition they're certainly prioritizing keeping alive. What other kinds of practices? I think that's something in like the normal spectrum of what people listening to this might know. Is there anything that is a little less known?
Well, there are smudging ceremonies, and that's the burning of certain herbs to create a cleansing kind of smoke. And this is considered to be pretty powerful, a very powerful cleansing spirit to purify people or to send messages to a greater spirit. And some tribes, they might use tobacco. Some tribes, they might use blends of different herbs such as sage, cedar, juniper, lavender, or sweetgrass. And so those are just some examples of herbs that they might utilize during smudging ceremonies.
I was thinking when you said that, did like yogi girls, like basic bitches, kind of snag that sage thing? Because I feel like I've heard of that. Like it's like kind of a yogi mindfulness thing now. We're burning some sage. Or is that like an
It
East
could
meets
be.
West? We both were doing that.
That's a very good question. That is a very good question. I think you might know a little bit more than me as far as what the yogi, the phrase basic bitches. I'm not quite sure what they're.
That's gender
I don't know what they're
specific
doing.
basic bitches. There's
Yeah,
everybody can be basic,
everybody,
you know?
anybody can be a BB. I'll say BB.
Yeah.
Anybody can be a BB. So
Shauna, we're gonna have
possibly.
to get you swearing on this show. That's really a core feature of what we do here is swearing.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't swear a lot. I remember one of the first outings we did during first year of residency, and Heather Murray, who we also trained with, she actually specifically asked me, so Kashana, I noticed that you don't swear that much. Is there any reason for that? And I said, no, I just the way I was raised, I guess. And it just, I work with, well, at that time I wasn't a child psychiatrist, but I am now. So I think working with children just further solidified my, I don't know. I
That's
just
funny.
don't swear.
I think
I don't know what it is.
swearing is needed to build rapport, maybe not with kids, but with teenagers. And yeah,
Sure.
if anybody was raised in an environment where swearing was the norm, that would have been the good Dr. Heather Murray.
So this clip here that we're about to show, it doesn't really show a ceremony in the traditional sense. What you're about to see is basically where a group of individuals, a group of patients at IHS, they're playing bingo, and one of the characters, White Steve, and that is completely coincidental.
How about that?
I just don't know what to say about that. So one of the main characters and one of the friends of the four main teenagers, White Steve, he won bingo. And then you can see in this scene, in this clip, they kind of incorporate a native practice of giving somebody their native name. And you'll see that it's something that it's a very sweet scene. And so I figured I would include that. And I think it's a really nice, sweet, optimistic way to end this conversation today. So yeah.
Hey, just seeing if y'all was paying attention. That's a B. B14. B14.
Bingo.
No.
Bingo.
Hold your cards, folks. Hold your cards, White Steve. And White Steve with the win. My dude.
It's not even a patient here.
I'm very proud of these. One of our IHS t-shirts for the win.
Can I put it on right now?
Absolutely. That's yours.
Haven't his people taken enough?
It's perfect.
You look cute, bro.
Thank you.
True bingo warrior.
Oh, no.
Dob you in this good way.
He's painting them
Your
up.
Indian name shall be Sour Sofky.
It feels so different.
Too hot.
Har hega anem do banma.
Do hair da. Not tape go the him. Hot tape go benda.
Har na kongi.
De oi be at a. Basanda in tamse damba. Imp a tongue up a tayi. Gigo daga gya gorop a ha.
And so what he says to the character is, what they take from us is they can't stop you from smiling. And Kashana and I talked a lot about this, that a lot of people really nervous about these election results, women especially, and members of the LGBTQIA community. I've been dealing with that a lot in our clinic, Cashana, people who are feeling like they're worried about rights being taken. And just randomly, it's hard to give good advice as a clinician. And I've said, keep living your life, keep having fun, keep celebrating, keep doing those things that are important to you. Because as we learned from Reservation Dogs, the key there is they can't stop you from smiling. I mean, as long as you're enjoying your life, that's the best way to fight back around feeling oppressed in any way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I believe there is a neurochemical basis behind smiling. I believe that when we do smile, there are certain neurotransmitters that are released that can help to stabilize our mood. And so yeah, those
that
kids were onto
positive
something.
psychology, it's got some goodness, huh? Well, I don't know
Absolutely.
where this is going to go in our Native American Mental Health Week, Cashana, but we'll just say happy Thanksgiving to everybody and enjoy your time, enjoy your gratitude, enjoy your food, friends, and family. And also, let's be thoughtful about the real source of this holiday and how to make sure we can understand and build empathy for everybody else. So to a kinder, gentler holiday, we're out. See y'all.